Once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a great king who ruled in perfect happiness over all his kingdom. Because this kingdom was so wonderful, so beautiful, everyone who lived in it was always happy. No one was ever sad. No one ever had to be told to obey, because everyone loved the king, and the king loved all his subjects. This wonderful king also had a son whom he loved very dearly. The son always did whatever his father wanted him to do because he loved his father so much and knew that everything his father wanted him to do was good and would make him really happy. For years and years, they lived in utter pleasure and contentment. And then one day, the father said to the son, "I would like you to have a bride and to know the joy of giving yourself away. Do you want to give yourself like this, even though you are perfectly content and happy here?" "Yes, dear father, I would love to have a bride and serve her." So, a plan was made. Together, the father and the son went to a far corner of their kingdom to choose a bride for the son's joy. But there was a terrible problem in the place where his bride lived. Even though she owed all her allegiance to the great king, she had fallen under the spell of a wicked impostor who hated the king and held her captive. Although her slavery was harsh and brutal, she had foolishly chosen to serve this evil one rather than journey toward the good king in obedience. The more she sought to satisfy the wicked impostor's demands, the more he enslaved her and put terrible, painful burdens on her back. In her misery, she purposely did things the great king had told her not to do, just to try to prove she wasn't a slave. At other times, she tried to be very good to prove that she really didn't need the king after all. This disobedience only made her life more miserable, but she still stubbornly refused to send messages to the king for help. But that didn't stop the great king. He loved her anyway, and even though she refused to ask him for help, help was already on the way. The beloved son was coming to rescue her. Because he was so wise, the beloved son knew that if he arrived for his bride, arrayed in his royal robes and with his army, his bride would be terrified of him. He also knew that in order to rescue her, he would have to suffer just like she did. So, instead of appearing like a mighty prince on a stallion, he disguised himself so that he looked just like her. His disguise was so good that at first she didn't recognize him. He looked just like any other servant of the evil impostor. But the more she heard what he said and watched what he did, the more he could tell that there was something very different about him. Unlike the wicked impostor, he was gentle and loving when she failed. When she was with him, she began to feel that there was hope to be free from the wicked impostor's grasp. In fact, being with him actually started to make her love the great king again. Even though she was changing, she still didn't realize that he was the king's great... Even though she was changing, she still didn't realize that he was the great king's son. But the wicked impostor knew who the beloved son was. He recognized him because he had known him long ago, before he had rebelled and been evicted from the beautiful kingdom. Now this impostor hated the great king even more and was furious at the thought that he was going to take away his slaves and punish him for his mutiny. So he schemed to try to find a way to trap the beloved son and hurt him. At first, the wicked impostor promised the son all sorts of presents if the son would just join him in his rebellion against the great king. But the beloved son refused. He knew that the impostor's so-called presents would only poison him and make him sad. The dark pretender couldn't fool him. So, in furious anger, he did the most terrible thing that has ever been done. He fooled some of his servants so that they rose up against the son. He got them to pretend that they were serving the great king, and they accused the son of saying things about himself and the king that were not true. Of course, anytime he wanted to, the son could have shown them who he really was. But this wasn't part of his father's plan. No. In the father's plan, the beloved son would have to die for his bride's foolishness and evil. So the son did his real power So the son hid his real power and allowed himself to be mistreated so he could escape. Let's take that whole sentence again. So the son hid his real power and allowed himself to be mistreated so she could escape the imposter's grasp. Then the most terrible thing of all happened. The people killed the beloved son. Of course, the wicked impostor fooled them into thinking they were really serving the great king by doing this terrible thing. While they were foolishly scoffing at his suffering, all the other creatures of the kingdom wept in great sorrow at this scandalous sight. Everything that they had ever known was suddenly changed. The beloved son had been killed. He was dead. In most stories, next would come two words: the end. But this story isn't like other stories. This story is very different. This is the best story you've ever heard. You have to remember that this great king owned everything and had the power and right to do whatever he wanted. He wanted his son to be happy with his new bride, even though she had just killed him. So, after a few days, he brought his beloved son back to life again. The beloved son had taken the punishment for all the bad things that his bride had ever done and given it to his bride. This was the greatest wedding present anyone had ever given. All the good went to the bride, and all the bad went to her beloved husband. Have you ever heard a story like this before? By the great king's power, the beloved son was breathing again. He ate fish and talked with his friends. He was alive. Then, after 40 days, the beloved son went back to his father's home. Can you imagine how glad they were to be together again? For the rest of time, they would never really be apart, but the son who came back to the great king's house had changed. Now he looked exactly like his bride, except for one thing. He had marks on his body that proved he had suffered for her and bought the right to save her for his own. Those marks were kind of like his wedding ring. They reminded him, and her too, of what he had suffered for her and how much he loved her. From then on, he would look like her and watch over her and protect her from the wicked impostor's tricks. Then, when it was time, he would send a messenger to bring her home to him. He made a promise never to leave her alone and to one day reclaim all the kingdom that the wicked impostor had tried to grab from him. Even though not everyone knew what the beloved son had done, someday they would all know and worship him. This is the best story that was ever told because unlike other good stories, this story will change you if you believe it. This story is like a door because if you believe that the story is true, a door into the beloved son's kingdom will open to you and you'll be able to walk through it.